The storm outside seemed relentless, each thunderclap rattling the old windows of my grandmother's cottage. I sat by the dying fire, the embers casting long shadows across the faded wallpaper, the floral patterns distorted by the flickering light. The cottage, nestled deep in the woods, had always been a refuge, a place of childhood summers and quiet winters. But tonight, it felt different. Tonight, it felt like the walls were breathing. I was there to sort through my grandmother's things. She had passed away quietly, in her sleep, leaving behind a house filled with knickknacks, old books, and the scent of lavender. It had been a week since the funeral, and while my family had offered to help, I had insisted on doing it alone. Perhaps I thought it would help me find closure, or maybe I just needed the solitude. The clock on the mantel chimed midnight, its mechanical toll echoing through the empty rooms. I shivered, pulling the old quilt tighter around my shoulders. My eyes drifted over the dusty photographs lining the walls, sepia-toned faces of relatives I had never met, their expressions solemn, eyes following me no matter where I stood. And then I heard it. A knock at the door. I froze, the quilt slipping from my shoulders to the floor. The storm raged on, wind howling through the trees, but beneath it all, I was certain I had heard it. 3 distinct knocks, soft but deliberate. I waited, the silence pressing in on me, but no other sound came. "Hello?" My voice was barely more than a whisper. No response. I rose slowly, my feet numb against the cold wooden floor. The front door stood just beyond the hallway, its frame warped and paint chipped. The glass window at its center was dark, reflecting only the glow of the dying fire behind me. I reached for the handle, my fingers brushing the cold metal, and hesitated. Another knock. I gasped, stumbling back. It was closer this time, as if whoever or whatever stood on the other side had moved nearer. Pressing against the wood, my mind raced with possibilities. A traveler lost in the storm, an animal seeking shelter, a branch tapping in the wind. But none of them felt right. Summoning what little courage I had, I pulled the door open. Nothing. The night was a wall of black, rain cascading down in sheets, the wind biting through my thin sweater. I squinted into the darkness, my breath clouding in the cold air, but there was no one there. No footprints on the wet porch, no shadows in the yard, only the restless sway of the trees. I shut the door quickly, the latch clicking into place with a sound that felt too loud. My hands trembled as I turned the lock, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. I backed away, eyes fixed on the door, waiting for another knock, another sign that I was not alone. Minutes passed, each one stretching longer than the last. Slowly, the fear began to ebb, replaced by a dull embarrassment. I was letting the storm and my own nerves get the best of me. I forced a laugh, though it sounded hollow even to my own ears. "Just the wind," I muttered, more to break the silence than to convince myself. I moved back to the living room, intent on rekindling the fire. But as I bent down to add another log, a soft creak behind me sent a shiver down my spine. I turned slowly, every muscle tensed, and saw it. The front door was open. A sliver of darkness cut through the hallway, rain pooling on the floorboards. The lock I had turned, the door I had latched, it was wide open, yawning into the night. I rose, the room spinning around me, and took a step forward, then another. My feet left wet prints as I moved, but they were not the only ones. Faint, almost imperceptible. A trail of damp footprints led from the door down the hallway, into the shadows of the house. My mouth went dry. The cottage was small, only a handful of rooms, all of which I had checked and locked before settling by the fire. There was no way someone could be inside, and yet the footprints wound their way through the dim corridor, disappearing into the open doorway of my grandmother's bedroom. I couldn't move. The house seemed to hold its breath with me, the storm outside muffled as if the walls had grown thicker. My pulse thundered in my ears, each beat a countdown to whatever waited beyond that door. I had to know. Swallowing the bile rising in my throat, I forced my legs to move. The hallway stretched before me, the floor creaking under my weight. The bedroom door stood ajar, shadows pooled within, an inky blackness that seemed to swallow the light. I reached out, my fingers brushing the edge of the door, and pushed. Nothing. The room was empty. The bed, still made from when I had arrived days before. The wardrobe shut tight, the curtains drawn. I let out a shuddering breath, my body sagging with relief. But as I turned to leave, my foot slipped on the wet floor. I looked down. A single footprint, fresh and glistening, stood in the center of the room. The footprint glistened against the wooden floor, water pooling in the grooves of the old boards. I stood frozen, my breath catching in my throat as I stared at the impression. It was small, delicate, more like a child's than an adult's. The realization sent a chill through me, sharper than the storm raging outside. I backed away slowly, my feet slipping on the wet floor. The room remained silent, the shadows pressing in around me, but my mind raced with questions. There had been no children here, not for years. My grandmother had lived alone since my grandfather's death, and I was certain I had locked every door and window before the storm began. "Hello?" My voice was a trembling whisper, swallowed by the dark. Silence. The cottage seemed to breathe with me, the walls expanding and contracting with each shallow inhale. I forced myself to move, inching back into the hallway. The footprint remained in the center of the room, a damp reminder that I was not alone. I needed to leave. The rational part of my mind screamed at me to run, to get into my car and drive until the cottage was nothing but a memory. But something held me back. A whisper at the edge of hearing, a soft tug at my heart. I couldn't abandon the house, not when it felt as if it were holding its breath. Waiting. The hallway stretched before me, a tunnel of shadows and old wood. I took a step, then another, each one measured, deliberate. My eyes darted to the dark corners, to the open doorways leading into empty rooms. The air grew colder, my breath misting as I moved. The fire I had left burning was nothing but embers now, and the house had returned to its winter chill. And then, behind me, a soft giggle. I spun around, my back pressed against the wall, my hands clutching at the peeling wallpaper. The sound had been real, a child's laughter, light and melodic, but twisted by the stillness of the cottage. My eyes widened, searching the shadows, but there was nothing. Only the empty room and the single footprint left behind. Panic flared, bright and sharp. I stumbled into the hallway, my foot catching on the edge of the rug. I fell hard, the air knocked from my lungs as I sprawled on the cold floor. The house seemed to shift around me, the walls bending inward, the shadows growing teeth. I scrambled to my feet, my knees weak, and darted into the living room. The fire was out, The room lay in near total darkness, the only light coming from the window where lightning flashed against the black sky. I fumbled for my phone, the cold rectangle of plastic offering a sliver of comfort, but the screen remained dark. No signal, no help. A creak behind me. My neck prickled, the hair rising along my skin as I turned slowly. The hallway was empty. The bedroom door stood open, but nothing moved. I strained to hear, but only the storm answered. Wind rattling the old glass, rain hissing against the stone walls. "Who's there?" My voice cracked, weak and small. The cottage did not answer. I moved toward the front door, every muscle screaming to flee. I could feel it now, the weight of another presence, something unseen, just beyond the edge of sight. My fingers wrapped around the cold metal handle, twisting it, pulling. The door held firm, locked. I yanked harder, but it refused to move, as if the house itself had decided I would not leave. Tears burned in my eyes. I slammed my fist against the wood, the sound a dull thud swallowed by the storm. "Please," I begged, my voice ragged. "Let me out." The lights flickered. The room brightened for a heartbeat, then died, plunging me into perfect blackness. I collapsed against the door, my body shivering, my breath coming in wet gasps. I was trapped, alone. No, worse than alone. Something moved in the darkness. I felt it before I saw it, a shift in the air, a ripple through the stillness. I turned, my back pressed against the door, my hands splayed against the cold wood. The room remained dark, but my eyes began to adjust, shapes emerging from the shadows. A figure stood at the edge of the hallway. It was small, no taller than my hip. The outline was vague, smudged at the edges like a charcoal drawing rubbed too hard. I blinked, my mind refusing to accept what I saw, but it remained, silent, still, watching. Who are you?" I stammered. The figure moved. Not a step, not a shift, but a glide, as if the ground had pulled it forward. It reached the center of the room, the dim light from the storm casting thin beams through the window. For a brief moment, I saw it. Pale skin, wide eyes, a mouth that hung slightly open, as if caught in the middle of a question. A child. The realization hit me like ice water. The footprint, the laughter, the small damp trail leading into the bedroom. It had been her all along. But how? Why? The girl's head tilted, a slow, unnatural motion. Her lips moved, but no sound came. I strained to hear, to understand, but the room swallowed her words. She stepped closer, her bare feet whispering against the wood. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my body refused, every muscle locked in place. The girl reached out, her hand, small and pale, hung in the air between us. I stared at it, at the thin fingers, the delicate wrist. She wanted something, needed something. The cottage, the storm, the fear, all of it faded, leaving only her and me, two souls caught in the quiet pull of the dark. I reached out, my fingers brushing against hers. Cold, so cold. The world slipped away. The floor dropped out from beneath me, the room spinning, the shadows closing in. I fell, my mind unraveling, and the last thing I saw was her face. Wide eyes, a small, sad smile, and then nothing, only darkness. When I opened my eyes, the world was still. The storm outside had quieted, leaving only the soft patter of rain against the windows. My body ached as if I had been asleep for days, my limbs heavy and my skin cold. I lay on the living room floor, the hard wood pressing into my back, and for a moment I wondered if it had all been a dream. But then I saw them, the footprints. They wound through the cottage, small and damp, trailing water across the old wooden floor. I sat up slowly, my head throbbing, and followed them with my eyes. They led from the front door through the hallway and into my grandmother's bedroom. The memory of the girl's cold touch flooded back. I shivered, wrapping my arms around myself as if I could hold in the warmth that had long since fled. I needed to know. I needed to understand who she was, why she had come, and what she wanted from me. I rose unsteadily, the room spinning around me. The cottage seemed different now, emptier, as if the walls had pulled away, creating a hollow space where the warmth of my grandmother's presence had once been. I moved through the house, the floorboards groaning under my weight, my breath a thin mist in the cold air. The bedroom door was open. Inside, the room remained untouched. The bed was still made, the wardrobe shut, the curtains drawn. But something had changed. On the bed, atop the neatly folded quilt, lay an old, leather-bound book. I hesitated at the threshold, my hand resting on the doorframe. The book had not been there before. I was certain of it. The house had been scoured clean when I arrived, every object catalogued, every drawer emptied. This book was new, or perhaps old, very old, and newly revealed. I stepped inside. The air grew colder, the dim light from the window barely reaching into the corners. I approached the bed, my fingers brushing over the worn leather cover. The book felt heavy, its weight unnatural, as if it held more than just paper and ink. I opened it. The pages were filled with handwriting, delicate, looping script that danced across the yellowed paper. I recognized it immediately. My grandmother's. To my dearest Sarah, the first page read, "If you are reading this, then I have already passed, and the truth of Ash Grove Cottage can no longer remain hidden." My heart thudded painfully against my ribs. I turned the page, my eyes scanning the lines, the story unraveling before me. My grandmother had not always lived alone. Long before I was born, she had a daughter, a girl named Emily. She had been a quiet child, delicate and shy, her laughter soft as a whisper. My grandmother's words painted her as a ghost even in life, a presence that drifted through the cottage, never quite touching the world around her. But Emily had died. It was an accident, my grandmother wrote, the ink smudged as if by tears. She wandered into the woods during a storm. The river had swollen with rain, the current swift and hungry. I searched for her, called for her, but when I found her, it was too late. Her body lay cold and still among the reeds, her eyes open but empty. I sat heavily on the bed, the room spinning around me. Emily, the girl I had seen, the cold touch, the small footprints, the soft giggle in the dark. She was my aunt, a part of my family, a lost child reaching out through the years. I could not bear the truth, the letter continued. I told everyone she had gone to live with my sister in the city. I buried her in the garden, beneath the old willow tree, and planted flowers to mark the spot. But the truth never left me. It haunted me, and now I fear it haunts you too. A sob escaped my lips. The cottage, the strange presence, the locked doors and darkened rooms. It had all been her, Emily, trapped between worlds, her spirit bound to the place where her life had ended. She had been waiting for my grandmother, for peace, for someone to find her and bring her home. I closed the book gently, my fingers trembling. I understood now. Emily needed more than the truth. She needed rest. I rose, the weight of the truth settling into my bones. The garden lay beyond the bedroom window, the old willow tree a dark silhouette against the grey sky. I moved through the cottage, each step deliberate, my fear replaced by a quiet resolve. Outside, the rain had softened to a drizzle, the earth wet and soft beneath my feet. The willow's branches hung low, their tips brushing the ground. I knelt at its base, my hands sinking into the soil, pulling away the wet earth. I dug with my hands, my nails breaking against the stones, mud clinging to my skin. The earth gave way slowly, reluctantly, as if it too had held on to the secret for too long. And then, beneath the roots, I found her. A small bundle, wrapped in cloth that crumbled at my touch. Bones, fragile and white, lay nestled in the dirt. I wept as I uncovered them, my tears mixing with the rain, my voice a soft murmur of apologies and promises. "I'm here, Emily," I whispered. "I found you." The air grew warm. The rain stopped. Around me, the garden seemed to breathe, the flowers lifting their heads, the willow's branches swaying gently. I felt her then, a lightness, a brush of warmth against my cheek, a sigh of relief. The cottage behind me was quiet. No more shadows, no more whispers. I rose slowly, brushing the dirt from my hands. I moved back inside. The house now just a house, old, quiet, and empty, but no longer haunted. I packed my things, leaving the old book on the mantel, its cover open to my grandmother's final words. "May she find peace, may we all." As I drove away, the cottage disappeared into the mist, the willow tree standing guard over the small grave. And for the first time since my grandmother's passing, I felt free. The storm had passed, and so had she.